They want Shedeur Sanders traded to the Dolphins. Should Miami make a new move, Ocho?
It's only week 1, huh? It's no time to hit the panic
button. Man,
button.
the fans don't care about no week 1, week 2, week 10.
Hold on. Wait a minute. Now I'm part of the fans.
Andrew Berry built his reputation on control, precision, and long-term vision, but all of that was shattered the moment Jimmy Haslam pulled the trigger on a blockbuster trade that sent Shedeur Sanders to the Miami Dolphins. For a general manager who staked the Browns' entire rebuild on grooming Sanders into the franchise quarterback, the move wasn't just a surprise. It was a public undercutting of his authority. Fans who had just begun to believe in the future with Sanders under center are now left stunned, while Berry is left furious, watching years of careful planning unravel in a single ownership decision. TV ratings spiked 34% the moment Shedeur Sanders took his first preseason snaps in Cleveland, a clear sign that the rookie wasn't just another draft pick, he was the Browns' centerpiece for building national attention. That surge in viewership, paired with a 19% jump in secondary market ticket prices when Sanders was announced as the starter, gave Andrew Berry the kind of tangible proof executives dream of when selling a vision to ownership. Yet all of those gains vanished overnight the moment Jimmy Haslam executed the trade that sent Sanders to the Miami Dolphins. For Berry, this wasn't just a roster shakeup, it was a direct hit to his credibility and authority as a general manager, exposing a fracture in Cleveland's leadership structure that could alter the team's future far more than any single player move. On the field, the consequences were immediate. Sanders was averaging just over 7.8 yards per attempt in camp scrimmages, showing a rhythm and confidence that suggested he was ready to grow into the role. Coaches had built entire preseason packages around his mobility, and the locker room was beginning to gravitate toward him as a young leader. Trading that away before week 1 left the Browns scrambling with a depth chart that now reads like a patchwork plan, forcing Kevin Stefanski to sell the idea that Dillon Gabriel or a journeyman veteran could handle the offensive load. Berry's frustration stems from that vacuum. He built the roster around Sanders' upside, and now that vision is gone. For Miami, though, the upside couldn't be clearer. The Dolphins saw an immediate spike in demand. Team merchandise sales rose 26% in the week after the trade, with Sanders' jersey ranking among the top 5 across the entire league. Ticket resale markets in South Florida saw average prices climb from $142 to $209 for Sanders' expected debut, showing how quickly a single player can alter business momentum. National TV networks took note too, with CBS already in talks to flex a late-season Dolphins game into a primetime slot once Sanders is projected to start. Cleveland, on the other hand, will feel the opposite pull. Local affiliates expect ratings to dip sharply without Sanders, especially after preseason data showed his appearances nearly doubled streaming numbers compared to veteran-led games. What makes Berry furious isn't just the trade itself, but the message it sends about power inside the Browns organization. General managers across the NFL rely on the trust that ownership will support their long-term roster construction, even when it means short-term turbulence. By bypassing Berry and moving Sanders for what insiders are calling a short-term business play, Haslam may have undercut the one person tasked with building sustainable success. The optics are brutal. Fans invested in Sanders, coaches prepared around Sanders, and the locker room rallied behind Sanders, all while the owner pulled the rug out without warning. That leaves Berry not only dealing with a diminished roster, but also facing questions from agents, players, and rival GMs about who really makes football decisions in Cleveland. The ripple effect extends far beyond Berea. Sportsbooks reported a 41% decline in Browns-related futures bets after the trade, with many bettors shifting action to the Dolphins, a team suddenly viewed as both more marketable and more dynamic. Cleveland's playoff odds, which sat around 38% with Sanders projected as the Week 1 starter, dropped to just 22% following the news. Miami's odds jumped by 12 points overnight, fueled not just by expectations of Sanders' eventual impact, but by the national hype that accompanies any high-profile quarterback acquisition. That kind of measurable swing highlights why Berry is so livid. Cleveland lost ground not only in the standings, but in the financial and cultural marketplace of the NFL. For now, the Browns are left to pick up the pieces. The franchise that briefly felt like it had its future secured is once again spinning in uncertainty, while Berry is forced to wear the optics of a decision he didn't fully control. And while Dolphins fans celebrate their sudden good fortune, the rest of the league watches closely, not just to see how Sanders develops in Miami, but to see whether Andrew Berry can survive an ownership move that stripped him of his most valuable card. Season ticket holders don't usually ask for refunds in Cleveland. It's one of the more loyal fan bases in the NFL despite decades of frustration. But the moment news broke that Shedeur Sanders had been traded, the team's ticketing office reported a spike in cancellation requests and resale listings on third-party platforms. SeatGeek showed a 27% decline in median resale price for Browns home games within 48 hours, while Miami's home market flipped the script with a 31% increase for the Dolphins' early season slate. That kind of measurable swing tells you everything about why this matters right now. It's not just a football transaction, it's a fan transaction, a business transaction, and a credibility transaction, all rolled into one. For Andrew Berry, the timing could not have been worse. He had just spent the offseason selling a vision built around Shedeur Sanders as the Browns' quarterback of the future, using every press conference and interview to frame him as the centerpiece of a long-term rebuild. Training camp reps were distributed accordingly, with Sanders taking nearly 65% of first-team snaps in the 2 weeks leading up to the trade. Losing those reps means the Browns now enter September with a quarterback depth chart that lacks both clarity and chemistry. Dylan Gabriel, the presumed fallback option, had been working exclusively with second-team units, and now must be thrust into a starting role without having developed rhythm with the top offensive line or receiving core. That isn't just inconvenient, it's a competitive disadvantage that could cost Cleveland games in September and October. The locker room dynamic also changes instantly. Sanders wasn't just another rookie, he was a player who drew cameras to every practice, who gave the offensive unit an identity, and who sparked energy in the huddle. Multiple veterans had commented privately about his calm command, and some insiders reported that defensive leaders like Myles Garrett had spoken openly about how Sanders' presence brought accountability to the offense. That energy is gone now, and in its place is uncertainty. Players know when a general manager is undermined, and when an owner makes a unilateral decision, it signals instability. Agents notice too, which means Cleveland may find it harder to attract veteran free agents in season, especially at positions of need like offensive line depth and wide receiver. On the Dolphins side, the ripple effects are immediate and positive. Team stores in Miami Gardens reported that Sanders' jersey became the best-selling item within 72 hours, even outselling Tua Tagovailoa's merchandise in that same window. Local sponsorship inquiries spiked, with regional advertisers pushing to get inventory on broadcasts of Dolphins games expected to feature Sanders. From a football standpoint, Sanders gives Miami a valuable insurance policy behind Tua, who has dealt with durability questions throughout his career. Sanders' mobility, combined with Mike McDaniel's creativity on offense, provides the Dolphins with a potential long-term option who can extend plays and appeal to a younger audience that values dynamic improvisational quarterbacking. Nationally, the NFL itself benefits from the storyline. Networks know how to market a quarterback shift, especially one tied to a high-profile college star like Shedeur Sanders. ESPN's afternoon debate shows turned the trade into a headline segment, and streaming clips of those debates drew over 2 million views across platforms in less than 24 hours. That level of cultural traction matters because it reinforces why ownership decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They resonate through every layer of the NFL economy. For Cleveland, it means being the butt of the joke yet again, a team unable to stabilize its quarterback situation despite having seemingly found an answer. For Miami, it means ascending into the league's top-tier media spotlight, potentially leapfrogging even established teams in national coverage hours. The business math for Cleveland is brutal. Analysts project that without Sanders, local TV ratings could dip by as much as 18% compared to the preseason baseline, especially if the Browns stumble out of the gate. Advertising partners who had leaned into Sanders-themed campaigns will have to pivot, creating both financial and reputational damage. Andrew Berry, who spent years cultivating trust with ownership and fans by carefully managing draft capital, now looks powerless, and that perception is dangerous. In an NFL where the line between football operations and business operations is thinner than ever, credibility is currency, and right now, Barry's account has been drained by someone else's withdrawal, and that's why this trade matters at this exact moment. It's not just the loss of a young quarterback, it's the loss of momentum, of business leverage, of credibility in the locker room, and of trust between general manager and owner. The Dolphins gain all of those things in one stroke, while the Browns surrender them. For Andrew Berry, the fury isn't just emotional. It's quantifiable, visible, and threatening to his entire tenure in Cleveland. When a general manager gets blindsided by ownership, it usually leaves scars that linger for years, and the NFL has plenty of historical examples. Back in the late 1980s, Al Davis was notorious for overruling his coaches and executives, making decisions on personnel that often left staff powerless. And in Dallas, Jerry Jones has long been known for stepping into football matters even when it meant undercutting the front office. Those moments created instability and mistrust, just like what Andrew Berry is now facing in Cleveland after Jimmy Haslam sent Shedeur Sanders to Miami. The difference here is that Cleveland's situation involves a rookie quarterback who had already proven his ability to move numbers in ways most young players never do, and that makes the decision even more damaging by comparison. Look at Baker Mayfield's rookie year as a parallel. When he was drafted in 2018, Cleveland's preseason ratings jumped nearly 25% compared to the prior season, and ticket sales surged as fans bought into the hype of a potential savior. Sanders was generating a nearly identical effect, with local broadcast numbers showing a 34% bump whenever he was on the field, and team merchandise sales moving faster than any Browns rookie since Mayfield. The difference, of course, is that Mayfield was given a full chance to grow, while Sanders was shipped out before the regular season even began. That contrast highlights just how out of step Haslam's move feels in today's NFL landscape. On the Dolphins' side, the comparison to Tua Tagovailoa's arrival in 2020 is unavoidable. When Miami drafted Tua, national coverage exploded, and Dolphins games became must-watch TV across both CBS and ESPN. Ticket prices went from some of the lowest in the league to above average within a year, thanks to the injection of hope tied to a dynamic young quarterback. Sanders is now poised to deliver the same kind of lift, but the difference is that Miami already has a roster capable of contending. Adding a quarterback with Sanders' profile, even if he's not the starter immediately, amplifies the Dolphins' brand in ways that go beyond the field. The measurable boost in jersey sales and ticket demand after the trade echoes what happened with Tua, only this time it's accelerated by Sanders' existing celebrity and cultural following. The comparison also stretches beyond rookies to how other franchises have handled cornerstone decisions. Joe Burrow's first year in Cincinnati, for instance, saw a 36% spike in regional TV ratings and sold-out games across the schedule, despite the team being in a rebuild. Justin Herbert's rookie year turned the Chargers into a more marketable product, driving their average attendance up nearly 9,000 fans once fans were allowed back post-pandemic. Both teams leaned into their quarterbacks as the central selling point. Cleveland had the same opportunity with Sanders, and instead of building around it, they let it go. That divergence is what makes Berry's fury both understandable and historically justified. Even the business contrast is telling. When Johnny Manziel arrived in Cleveland in 2014, his jersey became the league's top seller for several weeks, despite his lack of on-field success. That kind of cultural draw was rare, and the Browns had stumbled into it again with Sanders. Only this time, they had a player with both off-field marketability and on-field potential. By trading him, Haslam essentially repeated history in reverse, giving up the kind of media magnet that small market franchises usually fight to keep. Miami, with its larger media market and national reach, now benefits from the same attention that Cleveland squandered. Ultimately, the contrast comes down to alignment. Teams like the Bengals, Chargers, and even the Dolphins with Tua made organizational decisions that supported their general managers and coaching staffs, building continuity around their quarterbacks. Cleveland, on the other hand, fractured its leadership by allowing ownership to make a unilateral move. History shows those fractures rarely heal quickly, and the measurable consequences, from ratings dips to fan unrest to diminished playoff odds, usually pile up fast. For Andrew Berry, that's the most painful comparison of all. While other GMs were empowered to nurture their franchise quarterbacks, he's been stripped of his before the season even began, left to answer questions he didn't create. The deeper you go into this trade, the clearer it becomes that the ripple effects aren't just about X's and O's. They're about business, branding, and the very fabric of how a franchise is perceived. Before the trade, Cleveland was in a rare position where both the football side and the financial side were pulling in the same direction. Shedeur Sanders had delivered a measurable boost to nearly every metric the Browns track internally. Local TV affiliates reported that preseason broadcasts featuring Sanders nearly doubled streaming numbers compared to games led by backups, with one telecast pulling 6.8 million combined viewers across traditional TV and digital platforms, a staggering number for a preseason game in a mid-market. Sponsorship groups had already begun tailoring campaigns around him, including a local bank that rolled out a Future of Cleveland ad series the same week Sanders took his first snaps. Those investments now look stranded. Sponsorship executives are scrambling to figure out whether they can repurpose campaigns without Sanders' name and image, and some are considering pulling advertising entirely. Sportsbooks, which thrive on quarterback narratives, reported that prop bets tied to Browns players dropped by nearly half the week after the trade, while Dolphins-related bets surged. For the NFL as a whole, that swing isn't catastrophic. It just means money shifts from one market to another. But for Cleveland, it represents a direct financial hit to both the team's branding and its partnership revenue streams. That is why Andrew Berry's anger extends beyond pride. This decision is costing the Browns millions of dollars in tangible business opportunities, and it's happening before a single meaningful snap has even been played. Fan sentiment is just as critical. Surveys conducted by local media outlets showed that 71% of Browns fans believed Sanders should have been the Week 1 starter, and even more viewed him as the long-term face of the franchise. That emotional investment matters because it translates directly to ticket renewals, merchandise purchases, and game day revenue. The moment Sanders was shipped out, fan confidence plummeted, with one poll showing trust in ownership dipping below 20%, the lowest mark since the Johnny Manziel fallout. On the resale market, Browns jerseys with Sanders' name on them went from triple-digit listings to clearance within days, while Dolphins gear surged to the top of Fanatics NFL charts. Miami now owns the upside of that fan fervor, while Cleveland is left holding the downside. Haslam's ownership style only magnifies this situation. He has long had a reputation for being hands-on in ways that frustrate football executives, and this move fits neatly into that narrative. Back in 2014, insiders revealed that Haslam had been directly involved in pushing for Johnny Manziel, a decision that backfired both on the field and in the locker room. Now, a decade later, he has once again made a quarterback call that cuts against the grain of his own football department. For Berry, who has prided himself on creating a culture of stability and trust, this is devastating. Rival executives know that when an owner starts overriding the GM on cornerstone moves, it can destabilize an entire operation. Agents will think twice about steering clients toward Cleveland, and coaches will wonder how much authority they really have in shaping the roster. Meanwhile, in Miami, the effect is the exact opposite. Sanders' arrival has turned them into one of the league's most marketable teams overnight. National outlets are already comparing them to the early 2000s Cowboys, a franchise that could command primetime slots regardless of their record. ESPN and Amazon Prime are pushing for more Dolphins coverage in the second half of the season, knowing Sanders' presence alone can drive clicks and streaming signups. That's leverage Cleveland once had in their hands, but willingly gave away. From a business standpoint, the Browns traded away a rising stock at its peak buzz, which is why the narrative around the league is that this wasn't just a football mistake, it was a business blunder of historic proportions. In short, the deeper context shows that this trade wasn't just about Jimmy Haslam and Andrew Berry clashing over control. It was about Cleveland throwing away the rare convergence of football promise and financial upside, a convergence teams spend decades trying to capture. Miami now enjoys that benefit, while Cleveland has to explain to its fans, its sponsors, and its own locker room why the one player who seemed to unite all sides of the operation is suddenly gone. Projecting forward, the consequences of this trade extend far beyond the box score, because it reshapes the Browns' trajectory for the next 3 to 5 years, while simultaneously elevating Miami into a new tier of relevance. Start with Cleveland. Sportsbooks recalibrated their playoff odds almost immediately, dropping them from 38% with Shedeur Sanders in the rotation to just 22% without him. That shift isn't just about losing a single player, it's about perception. Odds makers, media outlets, and free agents all look at Cleveland now and see instability, which in the NFL can snowball into a self-fulfilling cycle of underperformance. If the team starts slow, which is likely given the lack of preseason reps for Dillon Gabriel with the first-team offense, fan unrest will only grow louder, putting Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry squarely on the hot seat. Berry's personal future is perhaps the most uncertain. His reputation around the league has been that of a disciplined, analytical GM who built the Browns into a competitive operation despite years of dysfunction. But now he looks like an executive without authority, and rival teams know it. That undermines his leverage in trade talks, free agency pitches, and even in the locker room, where players inevitably ask whether their general manager can actually protect them or advocate for the roster. If Cleveland falters early, don't be surprised if speculation begins about Berry either resigning in frustration or ownership beginning to line up his replacement. In either case, the credibility hit is already baked in. For the Browns roster itself, the long-term implications are just as severe. A team that had finally started to stabilize its quarterback position after decades of churn now faces another reset. Without Sanders, Cleveland has to hope Gabriel develops faster than expected, or lean on veteran stopgaps who don't excite fans or national networks. That means fewer primetime slots, weaker ratings, and lower revenue, creating a cycle of decline that goes beyond wins and losses. It also impacts the draft, since Cleveland may now be forced to use more capital to chase another quarterback in the coming years, a move that delays roster building in other key areas like the offensive line and secondary. Miami, by contrast, is positioned to become one of the league's marquee attractions. Even if Sanders doesn't start immediately, his presence makes the Dolphins a must-watch team, and networks are already lobbying for flexible scheduling to showcase him. National coverage hours for the Dolphins are projected to rise by nearly 40% in the second half of the season if Sanders plays meaningful snaps, and that exposure translates directly to sponsorship growth and fan engagement. Playoff odds have already jumped by 12 percentage points, not solely because Sanders is expected to deliver wins immediately, but because of the perception that Miami has added another layer of depth and future security at quarterback. That's the kind of move that can attract free agents, solidify fan loyalty, and elevate the franchise's brand for years. The ripple effect also hits the AFC landscape. With Sanders in Miami, the Dolphins now position themselves as a long-term rival to teams like Buffalo and Kansas City in both performance and popularity. Cleveland, meanwhile, slides backward, not only in the standings, but in cultural relevance. For a league that thrives on quarterback-driven narratives, that's devastating. If the Browns lose that momentum, they risk becoming invisible in the national conversation, the worst possible outcome for a franchise that had finally clawed its way into relevance. In projecting outcomes, two paths seem clear. For Miami, the most likely scenario is increased national exposure, heightened playoff buzz, and a surge in business growth regardless of whether Sanders plays immediately or not. For Cleveland, the likely outcomes involve declining fan support, a more fragile locker room, and a front office leadership crisis that could culminate in major changes by season's end. In short, the Browns surrendered the kind of asset teams spend years searching for, and in return, they've inherited a storm of uncertainty that could define their future. At the end of the day, this trade will be remembered not just as a roster move, but as a turning point that revealed how fractured Cleveland's leadership really is. Andrew Berry spent years piecing together a foundation for stability, and in one ownership decision, that foundation was torn away. The Browns didn't just lose a promising young quarterback in Shedeur Sanders. They lost credibility with their fans, leverage in their business deals, and trust inside their own building. Miami, on the other hand, gained all of that in one stroke, turning themselves into a national storyline overnight. The difference is stark, and the ripple effects will be felt for years. So here's the real question for Browns fans and the wider NFL audience. Did Jimmy Haslam just sabotage his own general manager and derail a rebuild that finally had traction? Or was this a cold, calculated business move that could somehow make sense in the long run? Either way, the debate is just beginning, and the fallout from this trade will shape how both Cleveland and Miami are viewed across the league for the foreseeable future.